Us. I'm Sensei Marco Lala, and thank you for purchasing my newest instructional video on the fundamental concepts and conditioning that's necessary for effective ground fighting and grappling. This will be the first tape of what I feel will be one of the most comprehensive series of videos on this aspect of fighting. By watching this tape, I will prevent you from becoming half of a fighter. And on the street, being a half a fighter is just as good as having no fighting skills at all whatsoever. Now, most true combat systems deal with both aspects of fighting, whether it be the striking area or taking down and fighting on the ground. Now, if there's any one particular area you should be becoming really proficient in, I believe it's the striking area, because that's how you deal with confrontations right off the bat. However, once taken on the ground, if you cannot at least reposition yourself to continue striking or work into some of the areas of choking, joint manipulation, and so forth, you will not be a successful street fighter. Now, by no means will you become physically expert by just watching this tape. However, by watching this video, I feel that you will be able to grasp what is necessary to become a good ground fighter and grappler. Now, this video is not just going to show you 2 or 3 takedowns and tell you that you can use your opponent's energy against him when you're fighting. If you look at most ground fighters and grapplers, they're probably the strongest of athletes. So please don't be misled into thinking that there's going to be some kind of secret in ground fighting and grappling that's going to make you win easily. Absolutely not. On this tape, I'm going to show you the conditioning, the intense training that a grappler and ground fighter will go through. And at the same time, I believe you will greatly increase your striking skills with the understanding of this information. So sit back, take a look at the tape, and really absorb the information here and learn what makes a ground fighter and grappler so effective. Us. To begin my discussion on the concepts of ground fighting and grappling, I tried to break it down into 7 specific parts. The first part is stance. Stance is very critical in ground fighting and grappling. The problem is, in sports such as wrestling and judo, or even more street-oriented arts as jiu-jitsu, sometimes the formal position, the square stance or the staggered stance, is not really that practical for street fighting applicability. What happens is, in the square stance, both feet are just basically parallel here, so you can set a good base point so that if your opponent attacks, you can firmly react with some kind of pushing or pulling maneuver. Now what happens is, you would break it up into the staggered stance. If you look at any text-oriented material with judo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, they basically start out with these 2 particular stances, the squared stance and the staggered stance, which means basically one foot is in front of the other. Okay, sort of like a boxing type stance, but what happens is the level is considerably lower because we're talking about grappling and grabbing as opposed to striking. So what has to happen is there must be a modification of these grappling type stances so that it can be effective in the street. So what we have to do is look at the other extreme, which involves the striking arts, okay? But what happens there is the stance is relatively high up now. That's what makes a striking artist susceptible to the penetration and the takedown skills of a ground fighter and grappler. Okay? Now, if we refer back to my iron defense video, I tried to bring up 3 important parts for a particular street fighting stance. And that is basically we don't want to go too much further than the stride of your average step walking down the street. Also, we want to keep our hands up to, to block or evade any particular techniques up to the face area, okay, or to the throat, okay, which is another vulnerable point. Okay, and also a 50-50 weight distribution between both feet. By keeping 50-50, we can right away shift to the reverse or the front leg according to the circumstances. Okay, so right now we're looking at a modified stance for the street incorporating the square and staggered deep stances of the grappling type arts. So the major point, okay, between this modification, okay, for this modification, is the whole concept of reestablishing the base, okay? From this higher up type striking stance, we have to be able to move right away down into a grappling type movement in case there is a low line attack to our legs for a takedown. So what we have to do is incorporate the high stance for striking and the low type stance for ground fighting and grappling, okay? This is really the weakness with the striking arts. It's just that the striking artist is so susceptible to low line attacks. Now what happens is, okay, getting into this topic of posture, okay, for the grappler, okay, especially in the sport-oriented grappling type arts, the line of defense is usually the head and the arms. So by keeping the staggered stance or the squared stance, basically he's using his head and his hands as a reference point as to when his zone is being penetrated. This would be very difficult for a striking artist. You do not want to use your head as a line of defense, okay, if you're in a striking art situation. So what happens is the posture has to be modified to a point where it's not totally forward now, it's still up with the hands up. But at the same time, getting back to this point here, this modification, okay, for street fighting, we got to be able to move into the low line stances in ground fighting and grappling. So basically what we're looking at is the whole idea of being able to reestablish the base. That is the most critical aspect here of having a stance. And reestablishing the base, we'll see certain drills on how to do that. Sprawling back or widening your stance just considerably so that you're not taken off balance and following up either with a grappling move or a striking art. I'll show you a couple little variations of what I'm talking about now.
Watch carefully as I perform the square stance, how wide my feet are. Also notice the alignment of my shoulders over my knees. Also notice the hands in alignment with the shoulders. Now we work into the staggered stance. This way I have much more mobility to the front and back, but not that much mobility to the sides as I do with the square stance. Now notice here how I'm going into one and the other very quickly and smoothly, changing from square stance to staggered stance. From the side, notice the square stance, feet are almost parallel, and then going into the staggered stance. Again, the hands are not flailing around, they're in the front. My line of defense are my hands and head, as described earlier. Now with the striking artists that do not know anything about the grappling area, their stances are usually very high, even knees almost straight up. This makes them very susceptible to attacks to the low level and throws. Also with the kicking, you'll notice how susceptible my support leg is to a possible single leg, takedown, or sweeping technique. Notice even with my punching techniques, my weight is not centered. My stance is very high. This is bad. As fully described in my Iron Defense tape, notice the stance I'm taking, 50-50 weight distribution, and I'm going back and forth from the striking to the grappling stances. This is probably more likely what's going to happen in a real fight. You have to move from striking stances to grappling type stances. Notice from the side here, back foot almost facing front foot on an angle, weight evenly distributed 50-50, and then I can move into the various stances. Notice how deep my stance gets at times as a result of someone possibly trying to tackle me or take my legs out or go for a throw. Again, notice the hands up also for parrying and striking techniques. Now, as I perform the demonstration with my training partner, even though the staggered stance, or in this case here, the square stance, will give you the most mobility in terms of moving around, the stance can leave you susceptible to falling off balance, especially to the front and back. It's a pretty solid stance from the sides. Now we work the staggered stance here. You can see that he can regain his balance much more quickly, and it's a lot more solid. However, the mobility may be cut down just a bit as opposed to the square stance, the previous stance. That's why the next lecture on mobility is critical here, being able to move into both stances freely, and of course incorporating the striking aspect. In this next demonstration, don't focus on so much the takedown, but what makes a striking artist so susceptible. Notice the high stance. He can be taken down with an outside leg trip or a single leg takedown or what have you. Now, what makes the grappling artist weak here is that his head is used as a line of defense, can be open for striking techniques. By having the big stance, he can be susceptible to low kicks and sweeps. By having the head forward, he can be hit with knees, hit in the groin there. So both have its pros and cons. What I'm looking at here now is a combination of both. Notice how I'm deflecting the strikes and also at the same time an attempt at a takedown, all reestablishing the stance and the base. That's what I mean about going from striking stance to grappling type stances. It all has to do with reestablishing your base. Again, here's more clearly what I mean. As he dives in, you can see I'm using my reverse motion here to counteract his momentum. This is strictly demonstration purposes here, and I'm not really getting into technique.
The next topic of discussion is mobility or motion. Now this brings up various different ideas. We have motion of the upper body itself and also motion of the stance. I want to concentrate right now on motion of the stance in particular, or with the stance, because stance without mobility would not be a complete discussion. Basically what we're looking at is we want to perform skipping type or shuffling steps so that we do not go into these exaggerated foot positions as I illustrated here. I'll get to that in a second. Okay. A good way to practice that is shadow type drills where you maintain proper stance, okay, and posture while you're moving. I get a lot into different footwork drills in my karate boxing connection video, but here you'll see how it can apply to ground fighting and grappling. Okay. Again, the key here is maintaining the same distance between your feet when you're going into motion or mobility. Okay, A here, let's say A is the ideal foot position. Okay, let's say just for an arbitrary number, let's say 1 foot apart. Okay, if we go into B, you'll see how the stance is considerably much wider. Okay, let's say 2 to 3 feet apart, leaving the person very susceptible for that leg, that lead leg, in a very wide stance to be attacked with low kicks or even grabbed or swept up. Okay, so this is not good. Okay, this is again getting back to mobility. We try not to veer too far off from this ideal stance. Okay, C is another extreme where the feet come very close together. In this situation here, you're very susceptible to sweeping techniques and even just being pushed off balance. Okay, the worst case scenario is D, which is, let's say, one leg supporting, especially after a kicking technique, or even being pushed off slightly and your leg coming back up to regain your balance. So you very rarely, you do not want to be on one leg. Okay, that again is another weakness in the striking arts when it comes to kicking. Okay, usually if a person does not kick properly with the proper chamber, okay, and the idea of reestablishing himself and countering or grabbing after a kick, he can be in severe danger, okay, against somebody who's really familiar with timing and distancing. Once that leg comes up, all you take is a half step in and the kick is ineffective. That's where you're reestablishing the base comes in. Again, an underlying theme throughout all these concepts, okay, when it comes to ground fighting and grappling, reestablishing the base. The last thing you want to do is get on the ground to fight, okay? We're human beings. We walk on our 2 feet. Ideally, that's where the fight has to end, okay? You do not be programmed to go down to the ground. But what happens is you have to be familiar with that area. Okay, almost to the extent where you divide up your training almost 50-50 between striking art and grappling. But I believe more so you should get into the striking arts because that's where the fight can end the quickest. Okay, so far we have stance and mobility, maintaining the proper posture and stance while you're moving. That's the first 2 points of this discussion. And I'll show you some drills and how we can work that.
Now, to elaborate on the mobility concept, notice the small shuffling steps that I take. This is so that I can reposition myself appropriately. Notice now here the big steps that I take. This leaves me very susceptible to attack, dragging my feet, losing balance, not positioning myself quickly enough. Again, notice now the short shuffling movements, going from square stance to staggered stance. Again, taking a look from the side. These big dragging steps here are very dangerous. They make you very slow. You cannot react quick enough. Now I'm working to short shuffling steps. Again, now I'm strictly sticking into the grappling type stances right now, the staggered stance and the square stance. Notice I'm always keeping at least 1 foot solidly on the ground so that I don't lose balance. Same thing now with the striking type stances. Now notice I'm shuffling, keeping the stance pretty much the same throughout the distance between both feet. I cover stance and footwork exhaustively in both my Iron Defense and my Karate Boxing Connection video, but this will give you an idea. Now what I'm doing is reacting against a shoot, somebody who's trying to take my leg out, and I'm bringing the leg that's being attacked back.
Topic 3 is level change. Now, without level change, you can't even fathom the thought of going into the remaining topics in this discussion. Okay. Now, I've broken down level change into both offense and defense. When it comes to grappling, okay, wrestling or jiu-jitsu, what have you, okay, we mainly think of it offensively, level change. Why do we think it about offensively? Because what happens is, in order to do a successful takedown, okay, we have to change our level so that we can get below or near the center of gravity of our opponent. Okay, this involves faking and explosive type movements. So what happens basically is the level change involves getting down to and charging in. Now what happens, this is going to occur simultaneously with topic number 4, which I'll get into even further. Okay, so offensively, we're looking at level changes in order to get in at a certain height. Okay, we can't just come in at the same height, because what happens is our opponent's hands can usually stop any type of takedown at this level. So we have to change levels significantly in order to get to that center of gravity and take the opponent off balance. Okay, now defensively, we can use that as well to stop an opponent's level change and penetration in order to take us down. So as a person level changes to come down, we can also level change down to the same level in order to reestablish our base, getting back to that original discussion about reestablishing the base. So level change as far as offense, we have to change the level to get in order to take down. Defensively, not only can we use the level change to stop a potential charging or tackling from our opponent, but we can think of level changes as far as striking also, going to the head and the body. That's a level change. It's just taken out of context from the grappling arts. You can see how it becomes a very important concept in the striking arts as well. So you have level changes not only involving the penetration skills of getting inside, but also the striking. Going high, low, faking low, coming high. And also in terms of defensively, bobbing and weaving. That involves level change as well. Okay? And also, in the case of a low attack, let's say to the leg, you have a level change coming up, if possible, raising the leg and so forth. So, level change is topic 3. Offensively, in order to get inside. Defensively, in order to stop a potential takedown from your opponent, or blocking as well, or evading out of the way of the technique.
Continuing now with the discussion on level changing, I'm starting out with the striking aspect of level changing. I'm going with body shots and head shots, changing the levels of my strikes. Now I'm working on level changing in grappling aspect for the takedown. Notice how the level change is explosive. This is going to get into the next step, the penetration. But as you can see here, again, going back to the strikes, level changing, working the different heights, combining the strikes now with the level change for grappling. All at the same time incorporating the stance and mobility that I discussed earlier. Trying not to get into a bad posture. Again, a quick example of level changing that has to do with striking. I'm level changing against this hook punch. And on the other hand, offensively, level changing with the jab to the face, cross to the body. Now I'm level changing after striking techniques. He's striking me and I'm level changing. But what happens? My level change may make me susceptible to his knee kick.
Topic number 4, penetration and setup. Okay, in the Japanese term, tsukuri in judo, the setup is basically, as far as the throwing comes in, is getting your positioning around so that you can take the opponent down. But what happens is, before that whole setup can happen, the critical factor here is, again, penetration. Without the level change, okay, penetration can be very difficult. Okay, when combined, these can make for a very successful takedown or initiation of a grappling technique. Okay, this whole idea here comes in the category of closing the gap. Okay, in order to penetrate, we are in a sense closing the gap. Now, what happens in closing the gap in the sporting sense of the grappling arts, basically is just level change and getting inside with the proper mobility. Okay, and maintaining the same stance and posture as discussed previously. But what happens is we're left susceptible to strikes. Okay, so we can, in a sense, close the gap with our own strikes. That is one way of really performing effective penetration. So that could be with jabs, low kicks, or even after a blocking technique, we're ready for the penetration technique so we can set up for the takedown or grappling initiation. All right, so penetration and setup. Okay, now, when we discuss penetration, what comes into mind mostly, okay, is a straight-in penetration. We're facing the opponent head-on, so our penetration, our level change in penetration occurs straight in. But as an option, we have angular-type penetrations where we come in from the outside. We step in and go for outside leg trips or leg takedowns, single leg, double leg, okay, from the angle as opposed to straight in. This can be work very well with the striking techniques in order to close the gap. Okay. One point we have to keep in mind, though, as far as penetration. Good, strong penetration, which will lead to the next few topics, driving and lifting the opponent or what have you, for the finishing move. Okay, there's one thing that you have to keep in mind. Okay, a good penetration can lead to the finish or the drive, but what happens is we have to keep in mind position versus depth of penetration. Okay, we don't want to solely go for a deep penetration, because what happens is we may sacrifice our position. So remember, when we're working on penetration, we want to maintain a good position. That means not sacrificing our posture, as discussed previously, our stance, and all those wrong foot positions that you can take with one foot or too wide or too narrow, balancing issues, as well as vital target openings. So we don't want to penetrate and at the same time become susceptible to bad posture, stance, balance, and leaving ourselves open for attack. So you can see how pretty intricate this whole system here gets when we start putting it all together. I'll round it up with all the topics, okay, discussed together. Okay, penetration without sacrificing position after the level change. The key to a good setup for the takedown or to initiate the grappling, or even getting inside. Penetration can work with knee kicks and elbows or other infighting close quarter combat techniques, eye gouging and so forth, palm heel strikes. So remember, okay, these concepts, although generally associated with ground fighting and grappling, work very well with the striking arts as well.
With this actual demonstration, you can see how level change and penetration go very close together. Now notice the level change, and I'm working into closing the distance. I'm getting in closer. That's the key to effective takedowns and throws. Now I'm working on different aspects of closing the gap or masking my penetration. I'm masking it now with striking techniques, whether it be a low kick, jab, or what have you, or head movements, feinting, and then moving into the penetration mode. Again, you can see from here, I'm working the jab, then level change penetration. Jab, level change penetration. Also working off the shin kick to the inside of the thigh, then level changing and penetrating. Always my hands are up, always ready for a possible striking attack. As you can see there, parrying, striking, and then working into level changing. This is how you put it all together. You may not comprehend a wrestler or grappler actually doing mirror fighting, but it does happen. You can work the techniques. This is what we call knee over toe penetration. Now, it can be used combatively on the street with some slight modifications that I'll show you in a moment. Again, knee over toe penetration. Notice the amount of distance that's covered. This is another aspect. This is that angular penetration that I talked about. I'm penetrating and angling off. Instead of associating penetrating with always a linear movement, we're working it on an angle. And remember, as you work with all these grappling type moves, keep in mind the striking aspect also with parries and throwing techniques. Here's a drill again, incorporating the knee over toe penetration, going up and down the dojo or the training hall. Notice how low my body is. I keep my shoulders relaxed and my body erect, eyes focused. Notice again slowly, knee over toe, and then switching feet. Knee over toe, push forward. Knee over toe, push forward. Now speeding it up a bit. Again, knee over toe penetration, very important in getting on the inside. Now, here's a slight modification. Actually, it's a training drill for the modification you're going to make for fighting application on the street. Duck walks, I'm doing it with my hands behind the head. Now, the reason for this is when you practice knee over toe penetration, you're making contact with the ground with your knee. However, with these slight modifications, you can make the penetration with your knee off the ground, but you're still getting that deep penetrating action. You'll see what I mean in a second. Again, this drill is basically to condition your legs to handle that height in your penetration. You can see here now that I'm penetrating, which appears to be a knee over toe, but I'm not making contact with the ground. This might be a little bit more combat oriented, as opposed to slamming your knee in the ground on the mat. These are little modifications that you would have to make, for example, to incorporate stuff on the street as opposed to in a competition or in the dojo. This is that aspect I was talking about, posture versus depth of penetration. Now, I may want to go in deep for a successful takedown, but I may sacrifice my positioning or my posture, which will leave me susceptible to choking techniques or knee kicks or sweeping action. Here's another aspect of sacrificing. I'm feinting back with a very bad stance. Here's the penetration now being applied off of a striking technique. That was a jab, double leg. Now we're using an insider thigh and leg trip. Notice again, low kick and then outside leg trip. I'm very careful taking down my opponent. My hands come out and post so that he does not get hurt. Versus a round kick, you can see closing the gap, making his kick ineffective. I can either jump in as he kicks or block the kick with a penetration. Here you can see the progression. I'm posting and then penetrating. This posting drill is mentioned a little bit further on in the video, but what I want to show you here is how you can penetrate and force the penetration in. I'm posting and then getting him on the inside. Watch again. Post and then in. What exactly is a post? You can see here, my arms act as posts to lift his hands up out of the way so that I can get in and penetrate. Now what we're looking at is the angular penetration that I mentioned earlier. Since penetration is always associated with a straight-in motion, we can change up and feint to the outside and work the takedown from the rear or from the side. Angular penetration, very interesting for fighting. Here's the setup that I was talking about. Notice the penetration here now. He has to turn his body very quickly and start breaking my balance. A very, very important concept in judo.
After a successful penetration, this leads to the next topic of drive or lift, driving or lifting your opponent. Now, these two steps usually immediately precede a finishing technique, okay, which is what we'll get into next, like choking your opponent out or beating him with striking techniques or whatever, okay? So the driving or lifting immediately precede the finishing technique. Now, the lift is what I like to call the strength option, okay? Now, lifting usually occurs when your opponent neutralizes your driving, okay? So if I level change, penetrate, and grab my opponent, and I attempt to drive him back into the ground, he may reach over and grab right over my back and grab right around my stomach, this position here. So I'm pretty much trapped there. I can't use my driving motion anymore. So I'd have to revert to a lifting technique here. That's why I call it the strength option. Okay, you might be in that locked position unless he changes his mind and starts going into striking. You might be in that locked position for a while. So what happens, there's no real time restraints involved as far as trying to get out of that, as long as he's holding you. Usually as long as somebody's grabbing you, okay, you're in a, quote, safe position, as long as he's not striking you. So you have the time to try to lift up, and that's based pretty much on some understanding of balance, but more so your power, okay, and how strong you are, okay. Your strength, not power. Okay, so that's why I call it the strength option. I wanted to make that difference between power and strength is because with driving, I call that the power option. Now, if you look up to the literal definitions between strength and power, power includes the factor of time in there. Okay, so there's speed and strength. So that there's time constraints involved in that. Constraints involved with power. So what happens when you're driving, you have to drive fast enough to take your opponent down without him grabbing or neutralizing that drive. Okay, or else you'd have to revert back to the lift option. Okay, so basically, I was getting really deep into the discussion of driving and lifting. But as far as the sequence goes, after penetration, you have two options: to drive your opponent or lift your opponent. Lifting is usually a counter to your opponent stopping your driving technique. Okay. Now, in the question of driving, okay, driving your opponent, from the penetration, again, getting to that original concept that I talked about before, where penetration is usually associated with a straight line attack. When you get the grip, immediately what you'd want to do is angle off so that you can throw your opponent off balance, because this straight drive may be causing your opponent to sprawl back or reestablish his base by also going back. So by throwing him off to the side, okay, you'll be able to more successfully do a successful takedown. You'll see what I mean in a second when we get into some examples. All right, but basically, right after the penetration, driving and or lifting. Lifting is the strength option because what happens here is basically relied on how strong you are in getting your opponent off the ground if he's just holding on to you. The drive option is the power option. Okay, why? Because it incorporates speed and strength. You have to get in there before the opponent can neutralize you taking him down. Okay?
Now you'll notice as we get in closer and closer to a takedown or throw, your skill level has to be considerably much more effective. What I'm doing here is driving my opponent back. I'm not working on the takedown. Again, I'm just trying to more clearly demonstrate the concept of driving your opponent. As he kicks, I grab his leg and drive him back, ideally or intentionally to knock him off balance. That's basically what the driving is for, as I did there. driving. Now you can see where the throwing may came in, or the lifting. What he's doing is blocking my attack with sort of a body grab or body block right there, and I'm re-establishing my stance and throwing him. This is all done much quickly, of course, but again, to demonstrate the concept of throwing or lifting as opposed to driving. Another example here versus a headlock is the lifting technique. The grip I'm using is going to be described a little more fully in the gripping section. But again, I'm just trying to more clarify the concept of driving versus lifting. The lifting is extremely important when your opponent is sort of countering your driving technique. It just may happen to work out that way. Again, be very careful with the throws.
Go.
Here's a lifting drill with the dummy. Notice the penetration and the driving in. Penetration and then lifting. Again, notice the level change, penetrate, then throw. This is what I mean about strength being critically important for a grappler. Now what I'm showing you here is I'm driving back in a straight line. Watch again carefully. I'm driving him straight back, and then I angle off quickly. This angling off can be very effective when your opponent's just thinking about defending himself by going back.
Topic 6, finish. The finish or finishing up your opponent. Okay, basically, like I mentioned before, there are several ways of finishing your opponent. Striking, okay, which is what I get into in my whole previous series of videotapes, is on the striking arts. Okay. Another option is choking your opponent out. And the third is some form of joint manipulation. Okay, breaking an elbow joint or what have you. Okay, or working some kind of toe hold or breaking the knee. Okay, the difference now with these is the sport aspect or the street aspect. Okay, in the ground fighting and grappling sporting type situations, the finishing move is basically could be a submission, or even more common as far as wrestling goes would be a pin, having your opponent's shoulders pinned to the mat. That's a finishing move. Okay, but that is not sufficient enough, okay, for our discussion here of street fighting application. So what happens is all those previous topic areas, stance, mobility, level change, penetration, and so forth, driving, lifting, and then finishing, okay, it may not just end right here. Okay, it could actually reoccur. The whole process can reoccur again if your opponent is able to maneuver, defend himself, evade, or whatever your initial attempts to some kind of form of finishing up your opponent. Okay, so as far as the sporting aspect goes, okay, we don't want to concentrate on that here. We want to concentrate on the street aspect. So what happens is we got to be able to conduct all those previous movements in our discussion so that we can finish with a successful technique. Strike to a vital point, choking out the opponent, or actually breaking a joint so that you can continue maybe going back to one of these two as well, or running away or escaping and getting some help. Okay, finishing technique.
This is a drill I call the tackle drill. One guy is assigned the bad guy. He charges in, and from that charge, I notice how the student reacts to that tackle. Notice here, once there's a separation, the bottom man goes right for a choking technique. This right here is what I'm referring to in my lecture on finishing techniques. A choke, arm lock, or some type of strike.
In summary of the basic concepts, I listed them here, one right after the other. You can see how important they are. You can see how they work one right into the other. Starting out with stance and posture. Okay, number one. Working to mobility. Remember, mobility and motion involves the body as well as the feet themselves. Not crouching down too far, not leaning too far back, exposing your center of gravity and so forth. Level change, okay, whether it be faking down and coming up or faking up, coming down in order to get in on the inside at a proper height. Most importantly, really, is to attack his center of balance. Penetration, okay, immediately following the level change, and then the two steps that immediately precede the finishing move, a drive and or lift. And then, of course, striking, choking, or breaking the opponent's joint, or joint manipulation.
This next segment deals with warming up and conditioning drills that are more grappling and ground fighting oriented to build up strength and the other very critical attributes for good ground fighting and grappling. First, we start off with one of the most important areas, and that's the neck. Here, my partner is applying downward pressure, and I'm performing repetitions up and down. This can be a loosening up movement or actual strengthening exercise. Again, here I'm in the base or post position on all fours, and now he's pulling upward as I try to push down with my neck. Here I'm performing repetitions. He may also hold it and apply pressure as I push downward, as I'm performing here. As he pulls up, I'm pushing down. This type of movement or training of the neck area is critical for escaping techniques as well. Here's another method. Again, be careful when you practice this one. You may slip. Again, strengthening the neck. He's applying pressure upward as I'm pushing downward. Here's another aspect or way of training. Applying pressure against the outside of his leg. Now going from right to left and left to right. I'm applying pressure towards my right side against his right leg. Now what I'm doing here is alternating between the two. Remember, not only for strengthening the neck, but very critical when you're on the ground fighting, being able to position yourself to push into certain directions without possibly injuring the neck area. This is one aspect that's usually overlooked when practicing and training with the neck. Now against the ground, again, I'm pretty much just stabilizing the rest of my body and working on the neck. The same type of angles, up and down, as I do here. On the sides, notice the full range of motion from right to left. And of course, on the back, pushing upward. Very important also for falling techniques, getting the chin into the chest area. The next drill, back arching drill, foot position number 1, is when one person is doing the technique. This position, foot position number 2, is with both partners are performing the exercise. Again, foot position number 1. Notice his feet are basically parallel as he's arching back. Now this technique is basically to get rid of any inhibitions you may have or hesitations to throw your opponent back. This practice makes you very aware of the balance attributes that you have to work on for throwing to the rear or lifting your opponent backwards. Here's how you can do both partners at the same time. Again, notice that we both have slightly staggered stances. Now notice when I perform the movement, I try to use kind of an explosive beginning at the outstart of the throw, sort of how I would do it in a real fight. Of course, I wouldn't go back to my head, but again, this is basically to also make the back a little more flexible, as well as work on any inhibitions you may have of arching backwards and throwing your opponent to the rear. A very good drill. This next drill is sort of a strengthening drill. I'm working on an Indian grip, as I'll describe later on in the gripping section, and I'm basically working on lifting and turning my opponent. Now, you may not do this in a fight, of course, lift your opponent up and throw him around, But this may be possible also while you're on the ground, having to maneuver your opponent or reposition him. Again, the wrestling type arts, the grappling arts, do always show how you may try to throw a person that's bigger than you or use opponent's energy against him. But the key is you do have to have strength ability. Now, you may learn all the techniques, but you may not be able to throw a person bigger than you without also some degree of strength. That's why I just say be careful when people are talking about using an opponent's energy against him. If you're weak, you have no chance of using his opponent's energy against him. If that were true, then everybody would be a top-notch martial artist. This particular drill here, again, gets into the ground fighting aspect of having to move your opponent or push him over or turn him over. But at the same time, you're conditioning other areas of your body, your neck, strengthening your shoulders and upper body. This would probably be very close to working your way into a choke or trying to turn your opponent over on his back. Now, he's also strengthening his base or his post position. Notice he's on his all fours, his two hands in front of him, as I'm swinging back and forth. These drills work so many different areas of fighting that it's very difficult to keep a tab on it. So what you want to do is just really work the drill nice and easy, concentrating on what you're doing, while your partner concentrate on what he's supposed to do. Notice here the strong base I'm trying to keep as he goes back and forth. He's working on his arm strength, shoulders, flexibility of the back. In this drill, again, a neck drill here, I'm also working on explosiveness. I'm doing this with a partner, just as a demonstration to see how it works. Now my training partner, Dennis, will perform the technique by himself. Notice the balance factor here and the strength factor. It's very important. Also notice the foot positions. He'll push off both feet or one at a time, regaining his balance. Do not practice this without someone who knows what they're doing, or with the spot, or at least working on all the neck drills that I show in other aspects of this tape in terms of building strength. Here's a sit-up drill, again, working the neck of the partner, the base. This base position that I'm in right now on the bottom is extremely important in the grappling arts. If you look at it from this angle, you see my base position, my hands posted, and I'm also working the neck drill. Notice the wide range of movement my partner uses when he performs the sit-up. This is a partner-assisted good morning. Again, working on the neck and the hip action. All these drills help in some area of fighting that involves strength or pushing your opponent off balance or setting him up for a type of technique. Here I'm working on my midsection, my hips, and my neck area. This next drill sort of works the same type of muscles, but again, it's a little more difficult. Now, I have my hands hooked around his neck. The higher up towards the top of his head you go, the more difficult it is. I'm also straightening my body out now, making the drill a little more difficult. It's another aspect with a towel. Again, very difficult. I'm using my arms here for balance and also to assist me in the lift while I'm exhausting my neck muscles. Here's an extremely important drill for the grappling area. Now notice as I swing his legs, I'm not just going from right to left, but I'm also bringing up very, very high. Notice here I'm also moving side to side. Not so much trying to take him off balance onto the floor, but give him enough movement so that he has to reestablish his base quickly. Now, of course, doing all these drills may be difficult in one session. I'm trying to give you a bunch of ideas to work with. Again, notice here how he's swinging high as well as to the right and left. This is what's called a fireman's carry drill. Now, I'm not really working the technique itself. For more combat-oriented fireman drills or side throws, I would probably go down on my knee or get extremely low and throw him over. Maintaining a high stance as I do here is very, very difficult. This is strictly a strength-oriented drill. Now I'm alternating from right side to left side. Again, watch the level change penetration and then working the hips. Again, a strength drill as opposed to a combat-oriented drill. Notice as my partner works it, he has a slight moment of trying to reestablish his balance there. This is the purpose of these drills. He's working on his strength and balance. Again, the more combat-oriented aspect of this move would be to get very low, or as if I'm reaching forward or sacrificing my posture, as I mentioned earlier. If I'm leaning forward and he comes in deep and low, he can throw me over his shoulders very easily. But since he's in a high-up stance, this drill is very difficult. You can build up explosive power and strength in this movement. Here's more carefully, I'm demonstrating the technique that I'm performing. Notice what's happening here. I have to control his lead arm and elbow as I reach in under his crotch here and bring him up over. He's hanging over my shoulders. These are leapfrog type drills. You may have seen these in our early career in gym and grammar school. But again, very effective for explosive penetration here. Him going underneath my legs is equivalent to diving in for a tackle or single or double leg takedown, or getting on the inside for a fireman's carry as shown previously. Now he's working strictly with the penetration type charging in drills. Here's an example of what those drills can help. Notice how I'm diving in, just as I did in the leapfrog drill, into a leg takedown. That was a single leg, or an aspect of a single leg, and a double leg. Now be careful with this. As I dove in, it's very easy to dislocate or injure your opponent's knee, so please be careful. Another strength-oriented type drill, holding your partner for at least 30 seconds. We can keep taking this drill a little bit further. As I lift him up now, I'm walking with him, again building up my upper body strength, my balance, and my leg strength. Remember, these drills don't always copy some type of combat technique, but build up specific areas or attributes that you need for fighting, in this case, strength. You can see I picked up the speed by running a little bit too. A back-to-back drill, again, it could be a relaxation drill for your partner and a strengthening drill for yourself if you work the squats with the technique. Notice how I underhook his arms. Now he's underhooking mine and lifting me up. I try to be relaxed here as I stretch my back out, and he works his squatting techniques. All these drills can be really excruciating. As you can see here, he's performing sort of a one-arm push-up with his other arm elevated. You can see here now I'll make a slight adjustment on his elbow to more focus on the chest area and the traps. These drills work on explosiveness. Also very good endurance drills. Now, by working the half turns here, this is a good application for people, like, for example, in judo, who have to come in and turn quickly to apply some type of throw. Single arm throws, where the person has to penetrate and then turn. Notice here I'm working different types of turn. I'm turning to my left now continuously. Before I was going back and forth. Now I'm working my right side. Very important for throws that involve turning your back to your opponent and flipping him over your shoulders. Taking it one step further, 360-degree turns. Notice here how difficult it is to regain your balance. This is what separates good fighters from great fighters. Top competitors may take something as simple as this and do it hundreds, maybe thousands of times, working on their coordination. Now I'm working on the basic parallel squat with my partner. Those of you who lift weights will notice a big difference between lifting a person and lifting a barbell. Keep the squats deep with their legs, top legs going parallel to the ground. I call these back lifts, or if you want to call them hyperextensions, working the back muscles. Again, all these drills also aid in some area of fighting. Lifting up, having to move away from your opponent, or as he's grabbing you, reaching back, or arching your back. As well as physically just making your back stronger. Now back lifts done individually. Now notice now, as I try to apply more explosiveness in the back lifts, I try to go airborne and land on my stomach. Also a strengthening drill for the abdomen. Everybody has seen the wheelbarrows. We're doing just basic palm push-ups. Working into knuckle push-ups. All extremely important drills. Then going into the clapping drills. Again, it's kind of a polymetric type exercise here where him stopping his weight from the bounce up will make his arm stronger. His wheelbarrow going back and forth, working the shoulders, then working into the knuckles. Again, the knuckles, not so much to transform the knuckles, but to strengthen the wrists. Now hopping, getting that polymetric type exercise, stopping myself from hitting my face on the ground. It's almost as if doing a bench press, throwing the weight up and catching it, using the force to stop the weight. This is in reverse. I'm using my body weight and I'm stopping the bouncing.
Drag crawl drill. You can use strictly your upper body.
Here's a classroom drill now. Again, designed to work on the upper body.
Don't go out too far. Why? This position here. Try to take as big steps as possible. So this. Right? Then when you turn, don't touch the ground. Keep it up. Then back. Without touching the ground here. Just like a crab. Right? So get a shot, and the first, and then click, and round and work all the way up, and then back. Ready? There you go. Drag, right. Good. Down. Drag, try to make it strictly an upper body exercise. So again. So one more time after the 3 times. Strictly upper body. Don't use your legs at all. Bring your feet up a little bit so you don't burn your feet. That's it. Just feel it in your traps and your shoulders. Stand, let me finish this. Good. I jump everybody loosen up.
Awesome.
Okay. 8 directions of balance. This topic here, those of you who have seen my karate boxing connection tape are going to be very familiar with this diagram right here. This was a critical aspect to our footwork drills. Okay, basically the different angles of attack. Of course, you can break them down to the 360 degrees. But essentially, we have these 8 directions of balance or 8 angles of attack. Okay. As far as grappling and ground fighting goes, okay, these directions of balance are usually associated with how you can get your opponent's center of gravity off his center base. Okay. Here's your opponent's center of gravity right here. Okay. Whether he has the square stance or the staggered stance here, his center of gravity is right here. So basically what we have to do is get him to go one of these angles. We can do it either by our initiation or him initiating a move and us utilizing that move or taking advantage of that movement. For example, if he were to charge in, okay, I may use an option of going with the flow or moving off to the side. Moving off to the side and letting him come in. Okay? I may want to try to initiate my own forward motion, knocking him back off balance. And then as you can see here, using those 2 examples, we can do that to these basic directions here. Angling off, left front, left rear, right rear, and of course, immediately to the left and right. 8 directions of balance, very important for taking your opponent off. Now, one major factor, okay, that I've noticed among ground fighters and grapplers, people who concentrate on this particular type of training, they have a very good kinesthetic sense, a very good sense of balance on the inside. When they're grappling, they know at any split second what direction the opponent's energy seems to be going. And the successful grappler and ground fighter takes advantage of this. Just by his sensory perception, he can feel where there's a vulnerability in his opponent's stance or his movement. This is the key here to working on these drills. And what I'm trying to get at in this particular fundamental tape. All right? In this tape, there's going to be topics that are not that commonly associated with ground fighting and grappling in some of the martial arts-oriented tapes. We want to see a whole series of takedowns and all that, but how does a takedown work? What kind of condition does our body have to be in? That's what I'm trying to get at in this tape. That's why I believe this is going to be very, very important to be able to successfully perform the more technical-oriented movements that I'll be showing on future videos. Okay? 8 directions of balance. We're going to work it with an opponent.
In this demonstration of the 8 directions of balance, I have my partner staying in a fighting stance. Notice, to the rear, now to the front. To his front or my rear. Now I'm working to the right corner, left back corner. Now I'm working to the right rear corner, or to him, right front corner, and left front corner. Now I'm going to the right, directly to the right, and to the left, directly to the left. In this next drill, which I call understanding balance drill, both of us are pushing forward as much as we can, and then trying to work on explosiveness and redirecting his balance. If there's any secret or key factor to throwing a bigger person, as always described in judo, it's the fact of knowing how to break your opponent's balance. This is the key. to good takedowns and throws. This drill is very helpful in, again, understanding balance. Both of you pushing in as hard as you can and then reversing the momentum. A very good drill. Gripping techniques. In this next segment, I'm going to show you individually or solo movements working the grips. This is a gripping technique that I do not recommend in fighting. The fingers can be slipped apart very easily and can also be injured if squeezed together, joints into joint. So do not work that technique. More appropriate may be this Indian gripping movement. Now, this movement here can be used if the diameter that you're gripping is very wide. What I'm saying is that if you need much more distance or reach in your grips, this grip can be very effective. In other words, if whatever you're putting your hands around is very wide, this type of grip can be very effective. Most of you have seen the standard palm-to-palm grip. The problem here is that what you're gripping may be very wide, gripping all four fingers. You may want to make this slight modification of sliding your thumb through your index finger and your middle finger. The reason for that is what you're gripping is narrower. An analogy is trying to grip a very wide bar when you're doing a chin-up. Before you know it, your grip is loosened. The thinner the bar is, the more effective you can grip it. That's what's happening here in a sense when you make this adjustment in your standard grip. Here's a good way to practice this grip alternating back and forth. Why don't you try it right now and get the feel of it. Now we move into what I call a knob type grip. Notice my left hand here is made into a fist and becomes a knob. Now I'm working the other side and I'm sliding down. So my fist actually becomes a knob here so that I can get a gripping action on my wrist. In this particular grip, you notice I'm using the full grip, or the grip with my thumb. Here's another application. Notice I'm using what I would call a false grip. My thumb does not go around the whole wrist. So the slight adjustment I'd have to make here is on angling my fist here. Notice the wrist now is angled, sort of creating a grip so my hand doesn't slide off. This is if I use what I call the false grip. Notice my thumb does not go around my wrist. This is important when trying to get the inside of the blade of your forearm into a particular area, like the rib cage or the kidney. Here's another variation of a palm-to-palm, again with the angled off wrist. Notice the angling off creates a stopping point. What I'm doing here is working all the different grips together, sliding one into another, because this is what you may have to do when you're fighting, changing grips. Again, this is palm to palm. Now, this is what I call a lever grip. This is very good for choking, like a front naked choke. I'm gripping the outside of my knife hand. As you can see, it becomes like a lever. I can keep my opposite hand fisted or open. I'm going back and forth now from the different types of grips. There's the full grip, then the false grip. Now you can see here in the full Nelson, I'm using the Indian grip. This is one application. I can work into a knob grip, but notice how my hand is not fisted. I'm using it to push against his head, applying pressure against the neck. Here's another application of the Indian grip. A body block against a possible tackle. Now I've changed it to a lever type grip. Notice now, by using the false grip, I'm allowing the blade of the inside of my forearm to go into his rib cage or his solar plexus. Notice the false grip now. Notice the thumb of my left hand is not going around my wrist. Here's an application of that standard grip modified with the thumb going between the index finger and the middle finger. Here's another application, hooking the wrist. Again, notice the full grip here doesn't allow me to get the blade of my forearm into his floating ribs or kidney. Here's another application, palm to palm. Notice how I'm not directly in front of him. Here's another application of that slightly modified standard grip with the thumb in between the index finger. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm driving the blade of my forearm into his carotid artery. This is referred to as a scarf hold, but it does have strangulation aspects to it. Here's a knob grip that's applied to an arm lock, as you'll see in a moment. Notice here, I'm gripping the wrist and working into the knob type grip. Notice my right foot is over his head also, keeping total control of my opponent. Here's another application. I'm pushing inward with my left hand and performing the knob grip with my right hand. This is that lever I referred to, extremely important and extremely dangerous in fighting. Any type of head tackle can be possibly blocked with this lever or front naked choke. Now notice here, the way I'm grabbing my partner, this is how we're taught to defend against a person that grabs us from behind. Usually the person doesn't grab us really good, and we can apply some of those really fancy techniques. However, if somebody knows what they're doing, for example, using this modified grip here, it's very difficult to escape from it. Very dangerous move. Now, notice here where my top hand is. My top hand is the left hand. Okay? Now here, my attacking hand is the top hand, my right hand. So my attacking hand right here goes on top. The reason for that is, in case he doesn't try to gouge my eye out or punch my head, and he goes to try to rip my hand off, if my attacking hand is not on top, I may be susceptible to the separation of my gripping right here. So I want my attacking hand to be on top. Ground fighting base. Again, getting back to my original discussion of one of the most important aspects of ground fighting is establishing this proper base with my hands posted. It's extremely important for balance and also for setting up a different move. This is a hip heisting movement here. Getting up, I'm using my hips, heisting it upward. You can call this a hip heist drill into a ground fighting base. Hip heist into base, hip heist into base. Now another extremely important aspect of this is that my balls of my feet are on the ground. One of the biggest no-nos in ground fighting and grappling is that your shins and instep are against the ground. This slows down your movement. By keeping the balls of your feet on the ground, you can move much more quickly. So you can see how intricate this can get, even down to the positioning of the balls of your feet in the ground fighting. If I were to just slide my shins and instep across the ground, it would be very slow for me to go into these movements. Notice hip heisting and going into the base with the balls of the feet. Now we're getting into some more neck training drills without a partner here. I'm starting out with my knees on the ground and my hands on the ground. So I'm in total control of the amount of pressure I put on my neck. Now I'm adding a little more pressure, again keeping my hands on the ground though, by lifting the knees off the ground. Then I would work into the more difficult version, hands behind the back, applying total pressure on the neck area and repping it out forward and back. Again to the rear, I'm sort of spotting myself. I'm giving myself a self spot with my hands, working the neck drill. Now without the hands, putting all the pressure on the neck area. Again, this isn't only important for developing a strong neck, but helping you to get out of moves and repositioning yourself without injury to that area. What I'm doing here is kind of working a turning drill and incorporating a little bit of the hip heisting movements and repositioning. Neck turning drill, and then a little bit of base work, moving around. Turn and reposition. Turn and reposition. Here we're going with some straight neck drills, spinning around. Extremely difficult, and please be careful when you practice this movement. A more direct approach to working on the neck area is getting a neck harness such as this. Always be careful to make the movements slow. Don't jerk the head up and down. You may injure the neck muscles. Notice in this position I'm using the square stance, hands on the knees, to totally work the neck area. Here I'm using just a 10-pound weight. Here's kind of a homemade version of what I just did with a karate belt and a cinder block. Now, the hands are helping me to keep balance, and also, as my neck gets more fatigued, I can put more pressure onto the hands, so it'll allow me to do a few more reps. It's sort of like cheating, like in benching, getting a few more reps in there. This particular drill works the neck area and the upper body. Please be careful with this movement. I've seen this demonstrated with a barbell, which to me seems extremely dangerous, since if there's any exhaustion or fatigue, you can drop the bar across your neck or your chest. By using the dumbbells, you've made this a slightly more safer exercise, and you can really work the chest, shoulders, and neck. In this next segment, I'm working on more technique-oriented drills. All the drills you saw before this dealt with conditioning, some area of conditioning, endurance, strength, balance. Here, my partner's working a basic headlock movement. Now what I'm going to do is work on a drill that I call the wrestler's duck. Again, I'm using a level change to deflect his movement here. Now notice how my arms are used as sort of antennas. At every point throughout the movement, my hands are on his body. Notice my left and right hand. This gives me good sensitivity. It tells me what my partner is doing. We're starting to speed it up a bit. Notice, as I duck, I'm not leaning forward, but actually going down with my hips. Watch here carefully as I do it. I'm trying to keep my head and back erect. I'm not just bending down or kneeling forward. Notice the hands now acting as antennas, reaching up forward, also ready for deflections or any type of strikes my opponent may throw. Notice here as we speed it up a bit, as he comes in, I'm right behind him. This brings up a very important concept in the grappling arts, which is called sticking. Notice how I stick to my opponent immediately after I counter his move. By sticking, it keeps him from possibly retaliating any easier than if I would create some kind of a gap there. If I were to move back, I'd be more susceptible to elbow techniques to the head area. By keeping close, if he were to throw an elbow technique, I can blend with the movement. Now I'm working this drill alternating back and forth. Notice the sticking action. From this movement, I can grab his hair, work a choking technique, do an outside trip, or any of many different kinds of techniques. Alternating back and forth. This is real good for sensitivity and on the inside. Now I inform him a little bit to pick up the pace. So what happens is he gets very close to almost applying the headlock. So So what I'm doing is the duck actually helps me in defending against a potential headlock attempt. Here I'm working a combination with strikes and the wrestler's duck. Somebody may try to close the gap with the striking technique and reach in. Notice the sticking action. Again, my head up is a little high now just so I can demonstrate the wrestler's duck. You'd almost want your ear against his back. That's how close you'd want to get inside. What he's doing now is basically throwing a series of different types of strikes. The low kick here, and then I'm working into the wrestler's duck and then sticking to my opponent. Now I'm sort of freestyling it a little bit, just telling him to throw various techniques. Notice how on the inside I try to stay in control with the wrestler's duck, close the gap, and stick to my opponent. Now remember, this is a drill, of course. There's so many different techniques that can be going on here. But what we're doing is concentrating on the one technique, the ducking technique. You can see there how it almost got me in a headlock. But even just the wrestler's duck itself, if there's not 100% commitment in the lock, you can slide out of it and then continue working with other techniques, as I did there as well. Wrestler's duck, notice the sticking action there, right behind him. Remember what I said, you want to try to get your ear against his back. It makes it very difficult for him to throw strikes to the rear. Now those of you who've seen the low kick tape, I'm just quickly summarizing the basic grabs. Lead hand, reverse hand, now across the body with the left, cross the body with the right, and then finishing off with the two-handed grab, which leads into the next drill. It is a neck strengthening drill also, but it's also helping me to learn how to reposition and control my opponent. Here is just basically just trying to go against the movement. The next aspect of this drill has him sneaking his hands inside and then trying to reverse the grip. Now work with your opponent. Give him a lot of resistance and then let go so that you can work the technique as well. Now, of course, from this particular range, you can work eye gouges, thumb gouges in the eye as I'm performing there, or strikes, palm heels, striking the throat, knees, or whatever. But again, sticking with the drill, we're working on the neck manipulation and strength, or how to control the opponent on the inside as he's grabbing you. Now this one, what I did was create a little distance in here. Now I know what's coming. He's just trying to grab my neck. So I'm trying to just evade or just miss the technique. There's so many things that I could do here, kicks, eye jabs, or whatever. But again, sticking with the drill, I'm trying to work on my sensitivity in this area. If somebody would have just come out and try to grab me, how I can move, how I can position myself, work the balance, set up for strikes, or a takedown, or pushing off balance. You can see how training can lead into hours and hours of different techniques, working on many different movements. Here's another application of the posting that I described earlier. I call this a post and shoot drill. Post and shoot. Many of you heard the different sports, shoot fighting, shoot wrestling, shoot boxing. That's all incorporating some type of takedown or penetrating motion. So what I'm doing here is post and reshoot drill. And you can take it to different degrees. What I'm doing here now is just posting and shooting without taking down. You can take it to the next level, post and shoot, working into a takedown there. Again, you can take one basic drill and add many different degrees or elements to it. What you can do is, after the post-shoot, you can do what's called a post-shoot and reshoot drill. Meaning, I can post and shoot into my opponent without taking him down, then he can repost and shoot and take me down. This next drill, helicopter spins, is basically just how to work the top position. With the hands behind the back, you're losing an element of balance here, counteracting your movements to the right and left. You'll realize how important your arms are when you're making movements and fighting. Another application of this is pushing down on the neck as you work the helicopter spins. This movement can be a controlling factor, controlling your opponent's head, or working into a choking technique. Notice how he's alternating different movements to the right and left. From this angle, you can see how he's working on controlling the head. Coordinating all the movements, the spinning around, repositioning, and possibly going into a choke or control movement. Here's one aspect of that helicopter type spin. Notice how he's charging in. I use his energy coming in and I spin around, possibly working into a choking technique or repositioning, grabbing his legs. Here's a snap down. I'm snapping him down and then working a choke. This is called a snap down drill. And then helicopter spinning around and working a choke. This is a push down or pin drill. What I'm doing is giving him a resistance for 2 or 3 attempts and then kind of letting him go so that then I can work on pushing off. I'm not pushing the leg over his body so that it gives him a chance to turn it over. This really gives you a good understanding of ground fighting, how to position your body, balancing. You can see how the neck drills come into effect here because sometimes pushing off is involving the neck. Notice when I push off, sometimes my head's against the ground right there. That's where those neck drills come in. This is sort of a type of 4 corners hold that you see in judo, but it's laterally. This is what I call a sprawl back drill. Basically, all I'm doing is applying direct pressure, linear driving, and he's sprawling back. As I'm trying to pull his legs in or push his upper body over his center of gravity, he's sprawling his leg back, regaining his balance. An extremely good drill to work on. Sprawl back drill. Now as we change sides, you can see here I'm underhooking his neck and his arm. Notice the underhook there. And then driving. Now notice I can use this to my advantage too. As I'm sprawling back, I may use that sprawling motion to take him down. And then again, notice the helicopter spin there for the repositioning. This is the weighted run drill. What I'm doing here is keeping him from going forward as he's using his hip action. This builds up explosive strength in the thighs. Now with this weighted run, it can also be used as sort of a defense against a suplex if he tried to throw me over his back. Notice how I go down into the base position. This half Nelson drill here, very basic movement. I'm going right for the attacking hand as he's alternating from right to left side.
Sprawling drill, or they used to call them hit it.
Now we're getting into some classroom drills.
Everybody see the space of about approximately 2 feet. When you sprawl back, I don't want you to bring your body, your center of gravity, all the way back this way. I want you to keep it directly above your center of gravity right now. When you hit it, I want you to keep your hips here, arch your back this way. From here, this way. This position. Everybody see that? That's why we call it hit it drill. Hit it. Hit it. This way. Okay, reason for that, he would come in for a tackle or a double A tackle. He comes in, hit it, this position here. Again, exaggerating the movement now just to show you what the meaning is. He's coming in and sprawl, this position. Everybody understand? All right, let's give it a try. Let's go back to your positions. All right, So I'm going to do it, we're going to do it 10 times. Okay, let's try it 3 times slowly. So from this position here, okay, squared stance, I go 1, back. Try to arch your back. 2, hit, and back. 3, hit, and back. Let's try it 10 times. Ready? I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, stand up, Joe. Next drill I want you to practice. It's going to be a level change off of an infighting position. Okay, Robert, look around the neck, this position here. I'm holding onto his arm. I'm looking around his neck. He's got my arm from here. Okay, from here, what I want you to do is, from this position here, you're going to, as you level change, you're going to post his arm, you're going to bring it up, and then you're going to move in this position here. Okay, what I'm looking for is explosiveness in the drop and shift in. Okay, so from here, you bring your hands up. So you're controlling the situation. Okay, a lot of times people think fighting is you're going to do one technique and it's going to work perfectly. In a sense, what you're doing is you're forcing this movement. Everybody understand? You're forcing it here by the level change and coming up in. Then you can work the foot down, knee kick, or you can work many different types of throws from this position here. But in a sense, what's happening is here, this is a lot more dangerous than this. Everybody understand? This position is a lot more dangerous. Okay, you can work on striking from here, but the idea is sometimes your mind doesn't think that fast, or your momentum is moving around. You might get inside and then rework your positive position. You understand? Okay, so face each other. Okay, do one step to the side here. Left foot front fighting stance. Right? Okay, hook around each other's neck with your right. Right, just like that. Good. Now let's try it slowly, 5 times. Cliff side's going to go first. You post, drop, and get inside. Try it. 1, post, drop, and then in. Okay, let's go. That's it. Let's go again. 2, post, and in. Right. Again. 3, post, and in. Again. 4, post, and in. Now the other side. Okay. You got it now from this position here. Post and in. I'm looking for explosiveness in the level change and penetration. Ready? I go 1, post, and in. Good. 2, post, and in. Right. Still keep control of this side. Still keep control of this side when you move in. 3, post, and in. Good. 4, post, in. Go again. 5, post, in. Now we alternate back and forth, starting to the side, flipping in. Okay, when I one count, one side, the other count, the other side. Ready? I go 1, side, okay, the other side, 2, again, 3, again, 4, again, 5, one more, and 6. Good. Now, anytime we work drills like this, okay, the objective is also the side that's being attacked or that the drill is being worked on. I also want you to understand about what kind of movements are occurring here. Okay, how you readjust your balance if somebody charging in like this. Everybody understand? So you always make it a two-way. That's how you double your own training. Everybody understand? You just sometimes when I show one drill, one person stands there, lets the other person do the kick or the grab or whatever. But if you're there working it, the drill is becoming twice as beneficial to you. Everybody understand? You're working the movement, you're becoming familiar with the movement, and all this, on the other hand, you should be also thinking about counters, how to position your body weight. Understand? That's what separates a pretty good fighter with somebody who's constantly growing, who constantly wants to improve himself. Everybody understand? Right? Face each other. And shake hands. Okay. Right now, it doesn't matter how we're going to get the person down. Okay, so we're going to start with a very simple movement. You hook the lapel, okay, with your left hand and your right hand here. So we're going to work with basic throw movement here. Now, when I step in, I'm going to push off and down here. Then what I want you to do is spin back in right away and get your legs in between. All right. What you have to do is try to reestablish control. Okay. If you're thrown down, any movement, you could have been taken down from a kick or a punch or any type of throw coming over. Everybody understand? What you want to do now is start to regain. Okay? Ideally, you don't want to be thrown in the first place. Okay? But sometimes it happens, we end up on our back. So Robert, you try it. From here, okay, down. Right away, you come in. You can use his body, or you can push off your other foot to get inside. Then what you want to do is, to prevent him from striking you, you want to create the least distance as possible from here. Everybody understand? I mean, if possible, you can try to work the kicks from this angle, all right? But that may not happen. You may have to start working with the grappling here. But what I'm really concerned about here is not so much what's being done here. Okay, we can spend a whole class just doing that. I want you to be able to right away quickly regain. Okay, you don't have to so much try to get him around this position here, but get your legs in between. Because then what happens is you can keep his balance off. You can keep striking, keeping his balance off by working his hip. This position. Everybody see that? All right. So from here, you're making it very difficult for him. All right. Let's try it again one more time. From this position here, you work the takedown. Move around right away. Then from here, like I said, you have your options. I just want you to work the twisting movement to getting inside this way. Everybody understand? Let's try it. Face each other. Left foot front fighting stance. Okay. One side, you're going to keep doing it over and over first. So Cliff, you're going to take Robert down 3 times. Okay? 3 times. All right? Let's give it a try. Ready? 1. Then coming right around. Good. Let's go again. 2. That's it. Good. Let's go again. Ready? 3. Right, swing around right away. Now remember, you want to create distance, not so much distance. You want to lessen the distance with his upper body, but you want to keep his lower body out of distance here. So actually, you make him lose his center of gravity here. He can't perform properly. Everybody understand? Okay, let's try it again. Other side now. Left in front. Okay, go with the sweep. Take down and right around. Twist around. Good. Good. Let's go again. Again, there's a re-controlling factor. He's controlling you with the takedown. You want to come right back. All right. Let's go again. 2. Around. Good. Make the throw a little bit harder more, because what's going to happen is the throw you're going to be dealing with momentum going in that direction. You have to try to stop it and come around. Right. So let's try to throw a little bit harder. Ready? And go. Right around. Good. Now let's try it back and forth. Let's try it 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Cliff side goes first. Ready? Alternating. And go 1. Good. Let's go other side. Ready? 2. Hard throw. Around. Good. Let's go again. That's it. Let's go again. 2 more. 3. Good. And go 1 more. 4. Good. AMA. Very good. Face each other. Eyeballs. And shake hands. Very good.
When you watch these tackle drills, keep in mind that they're not all-out free fighting or sparring or randori, where 2 people square off and test their skills against each other. One guy is assigned the tackle. He is told to tackle the opponent. The other person is told to somehow counter that tackle drill. So immediately that puts one person at a disadvantage. Notice here the reversal and then the choking technique that's applied on this person.
But you see right there the reestablishment. He's coming in already. He's aware of the ground fighting aspect. Everybody understand? Let's go again.
In this next drill, notice again one person has to tackle, and then how the other person reacts is the key to this drill. Of course, you may not tackle when you attack somebody, but that's the nature of this drill here. Now you're looking at a good body block there, which was then reversed. Notice the sticking action here, staying close to his opponent and working into applying the choking technique. Now notice here, although he wasn't allowed to strike, he threw the low kick, but now he worked into a reverse choking technique.
I stop. Good.
Notice this next drill here, you'll see how being big and strong could have its advantages. Although he's using technique, learning how to use his weight to reposition himself in this mounted position, straddling the opponent. Then from there you can work on striking techniques or chokes.
Pull him in. Neutralize the arm. That's it. Good. I stop.
Again, these are all to understand the concepts. Here what I'm doing is just demonstrating a point of being on top of your opponent. Notice how he's using all the energy. All I'm doing now is using my posting. Remember the base that I described earlier with my two hands and my knees? Now here I was trying to make a point, and he took advantage of it by hooking my leg. But notice immediately how I reposition myself on top of him. Again, he's using all his energy trying to push me off and reposition himself, while I'm just using posting and establishing the base on top of him. I'm making him drain his energy. Again, there may be a lot of techniques going on here, strikes, knee kicks, chokes, but what I'm demonstrating here is the fact that the person on top can have an incredible advantage by just being able to reposition himself, keeping him above the opponent. Notice again how I'm just moving with him, keeping my body on his chest basically. He's using an extreme amount of energy, trying to free himself, push me off, turn me over, or what have you. I'm in a sense actually resting myself here. I'm relaxing. Posting with my hands, repositioning myself, while he exhausts his energy. Here in this tackle drill, notice the spin around was not quite effective. He counters, he overreaches the choke, but then defends himself by leg locking and arm locking his opponent. From here you can move into various techniques. Notice the tackle here. Now this is what I showed you in the beginning. Notice the turnaround now. See the sprawling back going on. Now, see there was a little gap created there by separating himself? That left him vulnerable now for a choking technique. That's where the sticking element comes in, sticking to your opponent. Notice here he's using his body weight now as a defense against the tackle. Now he's going to work on a reversal type movement here. It wasn't quite an explosive reversal. It may also led into a dangerous movement, but notice how he quickly turned it around. Straddling and then going into the choking position. Here we worked on some headgear. What I tried to do is incorporate strikes and grappling. Notice to strike I have to separate. But again, notice the sticking action, always in control, working the strikes, and then if necessary going into grappling. That was a little demo there of incorporating grappling and striking. Knees, elbows, punches, arm locks, choking techniques, everything working together. In this 2-on-1 drill, I give my students a chance to beat on the teacher for all the torture that I give them during class. No, but more seriously, what I'm doing here is working on an endurance aspect. It's very difficult beating up two people in a grappling situation. So it really helps you to understand elements of balance, positioning, and controlling opponents. What I'm doing is basically trying to make sure one opponent doesn't do too much damage while I keep an eye on the other. My students actually try to devise strategies on how to attack each other when it's 2-on-1. Some guy goes for the head while the other goes for the legs. It actually becomes very difficult for that one person. Again, basically this is an endurance drill and also understanding elements of grappling. Here I try to use my opponent's weight against my other opponent. Now you can see the leg lock. I'm trying various types of movements. Now I'm using my leg scissors to try to control the bottom opponent while I hook the opponent on my upper body with a gripping technique. Leg lock and then gripping technique. Of course, when it comes to grappling and dealing with weapons, we may not want to get too close when we're dealing with a knife or a gun. In this instance, you can see as he tackles me, I slash the side of his head several times and then work into stabbing techniques. Grappling against a weapon is very, very risky. Again, against a pistol, you'll notice all you need is a certain amount of distance to be able to get off a shot. As you can see, as he charges in, the gun is fired. So please, when it comes to weapon techniques, there's much more involved.